All right, so welcome everybody. We are so excited to finally have Liz here for our Yale Ciencia Academy class of 2024. Um, Liz Neeley is a longtime collaborator of the Yale Ciencia Academy, and she's a recognized expert on communication, science communication, and other types of communication. Currently, she's the founding partner of Liminal, which is a collective um, to promote better science communication and science communication training. She began her career in ocean conservation. She's a scientist by training, as we are. And since that, she started developing her career in science communication, helping scientists find the courage and the language to be able to communicate their findings with, amongst the scientific community, within their institutions, and with policymakers. She also, for a while, was the executive director of Story Collider, and she is the founder and lead instructor of Storymakers Fellowship and co-founder of solving4.org. She is now an established expert and recognized innovator in these spaces. And so she's an advisor for very important institutions like the Simons Foundation, the Aspen Science Society and Culture Program, and the Institute for Diversity Sciences, among others. So we're very excited, Liz, to have you with us. And Liz is going to be talking to you guys about how to develop your personal and professional narratives to be able to really share who you are in science in a whole range of different settings. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you so
Excited
much.
to have you.
Thank you. And hello, everybody. Welcome. Whatever your time zone might be, I recognize that for some of you, it's starting to get into the late evening. And I want to begin just by taking a beat to acknowledge how we're coming together, right? So we're only seeing each other through computer screens. We may be very far away. And I don't know about you, but I certainly have a whole host of really urgent issues on my mind relating to what's happening in the world. Everything from violence to political situations to climate change and the winter storm brewing off the coast of California. And it's easy to get overwhelmed or flooded with those things and then have to sit through what feels like very high pressure, high stakes details about something like telling a story or putting your best foot forward. So I wanted to ground what I'll be doing with you today and tomorrow in that broader conversation. I don't think that we do science communication. I don't think that I focus on communication skills despite everything that's happening in the world. I do it in response to it. I think that the ability to wield language, to share who we are, what we know, and why it matters in whatever ways that we may be discussing is incredibly powerful. And so I want to sort of welcome you into my world. And what we will be doing together is a blend of theory and practice. This is how I've built my whole career, to be able to look deep into scientific literature, extract useful information, but then also sort of ground test that against what happens in the real world, outside of universities, outside of academia, the reality in a room or a meeting or a workshop like this. So we're focusing, as I've already said, on how we deploy this skill of narrative or storytelling in a specific application today. So we're thinking about writing cover letters, which is something all of you have to do whenever you're applying for jobs, whenever you're applying for postdocs, whenever you're submitting manuscripts for publication. And I think it's been true, at least in my life, that it is helpful to remember that writing controls our lives through fear, avoidance, and stress. And the more we avoid it, the more it controls us. So, what I'm hoping to achieve by the end of the day tomorrow is that you feel like writing a cover letter is something that you can absolutely do, that it's not a huge lift, that it's not a difficult ask, that you know where to start, you know how to progress, you know how to think about it, and you've got some strong foundations to build upon. So today we'll be mostly focusing on why do we tell stories? How do you figure out what stories you might want to tell in a cover letter? How do you think about the kind of self-promotion that we're really asking you to do? And then tomorrow we will have time for you to actually start working on some of your own material to set you up for your next round of peer mentoring conversations where you can start editing each other's materials. So with that all being said, I want to dig in and tell you about how I like to work. So what you're looking at on your screen is the participant workspace that I've built for us. This is a space for the people in this room to work together during this workshop today and tomorrow, and then for you to stay in touch with me. When you can see it on either open it up on your own screen, I've just dropped the link in the chat, or if you want to look at mine, you'll see that I've written it such that there's like an overview of how to use this. On the left-hand side, there's a little menu that has document tabs. Today we'll be in day 1, tomorrow day 2, that makes sense. The third tab is a place you can always go to drop questions or to share resources with each other. So to get us used to this cadence of working, I'd like you all to go into that document now using the link and answer the warm-up question. So if you scroll down, day 1, question 1 says warm up, share your full name, what you'd like me to call you and how to pronounce it, and then your favorite emoji. I'll give us, I don't know, say 3 minutes to do that. You'll see the timer at the top start counting down. I can see some of you already know how to add those emojis. You may have noticed the tip up in the welcome section about the keyboard shortcut to trigger your emoji window. I love that some of you are already reacting in the sidebar too with emojis. These are 2 different totally valid ways you can do it. If you're done, then you'll begin the practice that we'll always offer. Scroll through the other responses that are there so far. Add a comment or a +1 if you see something that you like. And in this case in particular, you may also go ahead and ask and start answering the next question if you are very excited to get going. I'm going to start talking again in another 30 seconds or so. I love how much alignment we're seeing among our emoji choices. You are also welcome to raise your hand at any point when I'm talking. If you would prefer to ask me questions verbally, I have scheduled our time so that we're not rushed. And that also, if you want to talk, great, just raise your hand and it'll put you into the queue. All right, so I'm going to dig in. And the first section, I just want to talk about why stories and what do we mean when we say, so what's your story? This is the kind of thing that I hear casually thrown around all the time. And it used to set my teeth on edge a little bit because outside of a specific context of like, what is your sense of the gist of your research findings? I wasn't really sure what people meant. And over time, I've tried to sort of narrow and focus in on that question. And so when I hear somebody say, so what's your story? When I think about what I'm trying to get you to do in your cover letter and in conversations that you may have in the future, I'm sort of talking about three separate things. The first is, how are you interpreting your science? What is the overall gist of what you are finding? But then also, how are you thinking about your career? Are you somebody who is anticipating going into consulting? Or are you someone who wants to go into, I don't know, a federal agency, for example? And then finally, the third aspect of what's your story is, who are you as a person? And I'm going to represent to you a viewpoint that may not actually align with how you feel. But I know that for me, when I was a graduate student, and for many of the hundreds of scientists I interact with every year, when they hear tell your story, there's a little bit of like embarrassment almost around this idea because it feels self-aggrandizing. It feels very self-promotional and sort of like in line with like a TED Talk or like a cynical brand of putting yourself first and selling the story rather than the slow, careful, rigorous, great work that you're doing as a scientist. And I know this because like when I was working as a marine biology graduate student, I remember having to go through communications trainings, just a short one. It was going to teach me how to do my elevator pitch. Um, and I found it quite overwhelming to try and have to not only do the work and then synthesize the work clearly and accurately, but then sell it. I felt like spin, and I thought of stories as somewhere between, I mean, frankly, like a distraction or even manipulative. But I want to show you the progression of my own career and sort of do a little bit of this storytelling in this vein that I've just described. So you get a sense of who I am and also how to interpret all the advice you're going to be hearing from me today and tomorrow, because I'm only one voice who might matter to you. So when I did that elevator pitch training, I was really proud of what I came up with. Right up until the moment that I had to say it out loud to the woman who was styling my hair. She said, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "Oh, what do I do? I study the synonymous to non-synonymous substitution ratios in the transmembrane regions of rhodopsins in the retinas of wrasses." Like, nailed it. That was exactly what I did and didn't give her anything to work with. So it's kind of surprising in some ways that I ended up going into science communication as a career. And that shift for me came about in part because I met a science journalist. She called me, she interviewed me about my work. And the way she ended up writing this story, which was the cover of Science News, about my research area, which was the evolution of color patterns and visual systems in tropical reef fish like wrasses, it blew my mind. Like she would talk to me, then she would call other people who were rock stars in my field. She'd call me back and say like, "Oh, can you tell me how Justin Marshall's new paper related to what we were describing before?" And I'd get so excited and she'd be like, "No, no, Liz, I didn't understand what he was saying. Tell me the story of the science." And so through this pathway, I started paying attention to, in the real world, how are decisions made? How are ideas articulated and placed in a way that they get attention from the right kinds of people? I'm the last 3 paragraphs of this story. And what she described my work as was that I was studying visual pollution. And just as we were starting to understand these color patterns in coral reef fish, we were losing these systems to static and turbidity, which is really powerful. And because of that, it sort of kicked off a chain of events. So I started working behind the scenes at an ocean conservation nonprofit. I was doing all the data analysis, and I ended up working to support environmental journalism and locally managed marine areas in Fiji and Papua New Guinea. Mostly here, I was like teaching Ocean Science 101 courses for journalists, and then I was also teaching communication skills to scientists and then introducing them to each other. It got me interested in thinking about how power moves in very different cultures, in very different settings. And at this point in my life, there was one 10-day period where at the beginning of it, I was in Papua New Guinea in a tiny little fishing village. And 10 days later, I was in downtown Manhattan hosting a breakfast at Tiffany's, which was our major funder, on a campaign that was bringing in like editors of all the big women's fashion magazines, because I also worked on deep sea corals. I could do that because I could speak the language of fashion. I could pronounce the names of the designers. And I understood how powerful the people who are making buying decisions, the people who understand and have the kinds of budgets that a company like Tiffany & Co. Foundation or Tiffany & Co., the company, has. And so industry is one sector and one area of interest where I wanted to learn about how to communicate effectively and how stories play out there. But it wasn't the only sector. I also wanted to understand international policy and how regulations get made. So I worked at the interface of science journalism and then US federal policy, as well as at the international level in the regulation first of deep sea corals. And then I moved into other kinds of fisheries projects. So here I was pursuing what's called an elite media strategy of connecting scientists who had big papers that we knew were going to make a splash. They were published in high profile, high impact factor journals. And then my job would be to write press releases around them, to plan press conferences, to prep them for testimony if they were going to go in front of the Senate, for example. And in these real world examples of science communication and storytelling about the products of science and also about the people doing the science, this is how I kind of ended up getting into first person storytelling. So you heard Giovanna say I used to be the executive director of the Story Collider. And this is a live show. It's a podcast as well, where a single person stands in front of a microphone and has 10 minutes, no slides, no props, to talk about something that happened to them in their life in science. And so in 2019, when this picture was taken, December 2019, I was feeling pretty great about science communication, narrative, all of it, my career, my life. But if your whole business model is hosting live shows for like 100 people in basement bars, you're in trouble when something like a global pandemic hits. We had to pivot really quickly and figure out, how do we keep doing this work? And although in the first couple weeks, I was just trying to take care of my team and make sure that like we were okay, from there, I quickly decided that I needed to come back to where I started more and communicate, to talk about how do we express the science that we know. So this is the story of how I came to form Liminal. I founded it, and why I do the work that I do. And it brings me to this perspective that I bring to storytelling and narrative and the things that I'm going to be talking to you about folding into your cover letters. Because I'm curious if this next slide reflects your truth at all. When I do workshops and it's, senior faculty members want to know about how do I tell a good story. The kinds of questions they ask me are like, how do I figure out which story to tell? Or like, can you give me a specific format that I just like plug my memories into? Or like, how much difference does it actually make? But the truth is, it's much more fraught than that. And if I pay attention carefully to the faces and the body language and the dynamics of the conversation in the room, I'm sensitive to all these other things that are bubbling up. So paying attention to that, I hear all sorts of criticisms and concerns and worries and fears. Some of them I've already articulated, like, I actually think this is a distraction, or I want people to think rigorously and logically and coolly. I don't want them to be distracted by emotions. Or maybe even something like, I just don't know what to say, or I don't have a story to tell myself. And so this is setting me up to talk with you about what our expectations are together and for each other. So I'd like you to turn your attention back into the Google Doc and think about narratives in general. I see most of you have already written in some beginnings of definitions. You've heard me talk about that a little bit more. And I'd love to ask, without using the words story or narrative or any versions of those, to get into like, what's the next sentence of the definition, right? So this says, I asked you to define a narrative, and you might say like, oh, it's a story about a personal experience. What does that mean? What is a story? So push yourself to get one more sentence out that defines how would you decide what is a story and what is not a story. I'm going to be watching you. I'll comment as I see it coming around. This is just a quick exercise. So I'm seeing some elements that describe the story quality, that it is captivating or exciting. That some of you are talking about what a story does, of encapsulating experience or knowledge. Some of you are talking about the actual content, which is recounting events with a detailed description. I'm seeing events coming up quite a lot in your definitions. And I love some of, like, this is a tricky thing to do. It used to frustrate me to no end that we don't have a good, solid, common working definition of what a story or a narrative is. But I like things that you're describing about the worlds inside us, our internal experiences and our external experiences. You're talking about needs and celebration and pain. And you all understand that narrative it's an adaptation, right? It is something that humans evolved as a way of packaging information. That's really important. That's about like who we are, what we care about, how we survive, and then transmitting that efficiently through space and time. So what's really interesting about stories is they engage a different kind of cognitive architecture. We almost cannot help ourselves but pay attention when somebody shifts out of argument-based, evidence-based argumentation and into a storytelling mode. It's like our ears perk up whether we intend to or not. And so what I'm excited about is to think, okay, so we have this sense that stories are powerful, but I'm curious about how you have already been exposed to advice about why and how to tell stories. And so please turn your attention to exercise number 3. Here it says expectations. Think about other training you've received or advice or things you've read about how you present yourself professionally and how you tell the story of you, especially in a cover letter. I'd like you to like go deep. Just think about everything that you've heard or been told you expect me to say. I'm going to set a timer again and give you, let's say, 4 minutes. and I'll be quiet so that you can just think and write. Okay, I can see we have timed this well, and as the final 30 seconds run down, you've mostly finished your comments. I'd love you to unmute yourselves, and I want to ask you to read through this total list if you haven't already. Scroll from the top, think about what everyone else has written here in the expectations section, and then tell me, how does this make you feel when you look at this list of advice?
It's not myself. Like, I can't portray my human self
Hmm.
in these terms. Yeah. Or it's very difficult, at least.
Can you describe more about, I'm thinking, you're making me think about the idea of like projecting a persona, something that is true-ish, but not complete. And is almost like maybe a mask in the negative sense of the word. Is that what you're thinking about, or are you thinking in a different
Yeah,
direction?
if I feel like if I have to use or if I have to make my personal or my cover letter using these like qualities or tips, I feel like I can't best represent myself because I don't feel like those qualities really describe me, or
Mm.
it's not the qualities that I don't, or I think there are other qualities to people that are more important than what is only being said here, like be professional or be concise. I don't think I fit in that. And so it's like I can't represent myself truly if I am to restrict myself to these uh checklists, I guess. In a
Yeah.
way, yeah. So it's like if I have to use these words, it's like describing a version of me that's not really there. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Who else does that resonate with? Or do you have I'm seeing some head nods. Do you want to unmute yourselves and elaborate?
I guess when I write a cover letter, I want people to get a sense of who I am as a person and what my values are. And my values are more than my skills. So yeah, that's what comes up for me.
Mhm. Does it feel like a possible task? Does it feel daunting? Does this, for those of you who haven't shared yet, you look at this and you saw me, I was adding notes. I was like, ooh, professionalism is such a laden word. What is professional? When you say polished, how is that assessed? Someone want to talk about contradictory or ambiguous, the ambiguous nature of some of these pieces of advice?
So I actually wrote about the polished part. And as I feel like this year in particular, I've had to do a lot of writing about myself for different things that I'm applying for, whether they're travel grants or bigger grants or whatever. And yeah, it's interesting to maybe especially in an academic setting, this like need to be a specific level of professional and kind of filtering who you really truly are so that you're presenting your best self, of course, but sometimes it feels like a lie. And I love writing, but I feel like when I'm restricted to kind of what I think is expected of me in these sorts of cover letters and stories about, for things that I apply for, it feels fake. It feels very superficial and I kind of hate it. I really hate writing about myself because like it just feels so cringy. Yeah, I don't know. I'm realizing when write more that I feel that way. But oddly, when I applied for YCA, I didn't feel cringy because I felt like I could be my true self and like write about me. And I think it's because of the environment that was already set up. Like I think it was almost like it was encouraged to really tell like your story, what makes you different in as a scientist. It's not just about your science or like we all went to good schools. It's like what is your impact as a person and like how are you like that really interesting, unique person and what you bring to the table.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your honesty of saying like, I hate it, because like that feels real. And that feels like the reality of what I see when friends and I sit down to do this work. Tina, back to you.
Yeah, I think a part of me also distrusts those words because they're often rooted in a lot of white supremacy thinking about what professionalism is supposed to be. And as a person of color, I'm not always held up fairly to those standards. And that's why I always want to resist it.
Yeah. If you have more thoughts about this, keep writing them in the document. But I'm glad we've surfaced this because I think it is incumbent on me, especially as a facilitator creating space for this, to acknowledge the reality. Like you will encounter white supremacy and all kinds of forms of bias. You do have, it is reasonable that you are making these calculations and figuring out how to walk the line. And it is absolutely legitimate to feel a lot of ways about what we're trying to do. So here's what I can promise you. I can't give you magic bullets, magic wands, language that will be ironclad. We all are susceptible to criticism in all sorts of different ways. What I am going to try and do is take the advice that I have accumulated over 20 years of thinking really deeply about communication, persuasion, and first-person narratives, and boil it down to you. And my guiding stars for doing this is that I want all of my work and my work on your behalf to be effective. So I'm not giving you advice that steers you in the wrong direction, that it is efficient, so that it is like the return on your time investment is solid. And also that it is ethical, that it is grounded in anti-racist principles, in a real world understanding of where we find ourselves. But none of that, I think, means that we can't find joy in this and that we can't find value in this. So when Kiki and Tina were talking, I was thinking about how often it is the case that when I do this work myself, I encounter these negative feelings around like, oh, this feels like a lie, or like, how am I going to position this thing? And like, how am I going to be scrutinized? And I'm pulling it back. And when I brag about my own accomplishments, it feels kind of gross. But then when my friends give me their cover letters, I find it so easy to like punch them up. And I'm like, you're amazing. You can say so much more than this. So I find it the case that we often really only like see our own magnificence through other people's eyes. And that one of the great gifts we can give to each other is to hold up a mirror and to say, like, you are amazing. You are doing incredible work. You can say more. You should be bolder in your claims. And then when it comes back to the ethical part, like, we are all scientists. You are making claims in a cover letter about your passion, your commitment, your skills, your attitudes, the likelihood of you being a good fit for a job. And then we are going to back that up with claims. Some of those may be very straightforward and very much in keeping with the kind of argumentation you do in thinking and writing about science. And then others are more in this narrative mode of rhetoric, but you're still making a claim and then backing it up. And so we have already started to talk about why this is hard, why the nature. I mean, like, I teach entire writing sessions that's just like any kind of writing you need to do. And I know that sitting down in front of a blank page is intimidating, regardless of the topic. But a cover letter and a personal narrative is hard in a different way. And it makes me think of like taking selfies, right? That you may actually really enjoy doing it. You like having had done it. Like when you have the finished product that you can share with the world, it's great. But you may feel like you may need to go through lots of iterations to get the right angle. You may not feel good about other people watching you prepare to take selfies. And some of this self-consciousness is like not knowing how to find a flattering light and the right angle, right? And some of it is around, again, this idea that we are doing this for other people's consumption. And we know that you cannot please everyone all the time. One of the things I really like to think about is finding your own path and figuring out, okay, if I literally, it is impossible for everyone who reads my application or who reads my CV, who reads my cover letter, to come away believing that I am the top candidate. How do I make sense of choices that might be a little bit polarizing? Or how do I integrate perhaps feedback like I get from one person that says, oh, this is too cringy, don't do that. And somebody else says, oh, I really like what you've done. Processing this kind of conflicting information is important and is part of the work of writing and of telling stories. So I was thinking that when I consider my own challenges and my own work, I think about some of this is like translating myself into different formats, right? Like on the right, there's a picture of me holding my morning coffee. There's me who is in front of you right now. And then there's me who has to write a brief bio so that Giovanna can introduce me properly as a speaker. And it's kind of embarrassing to hear that said out loud. But also, like, who's the me that's on my LinkedIn page? How do I show up in my resume? How do I show up in a bio sketch where I'm being judged by academics rather than by clients who may already be quite familiar with the kind of creative outsider work that I bring? So there's lots of things that are going on here. And so when we really dig into this and think about what's the nature of the task in front of us, I came up with like, I think maybe 6 bullet points here, and I'd love to hear your reactions to them as I go through. So use reaction emojis on your screen, raise your hands if you want to comment, and I'll ask at the end. But so I think the first reason this is hard is because the stakes are high. There is a strong sense that this particular skill of being able to write the cover letter, which functions as your foot in the door, right? It gets your application into consideration. Because if the cover letter is bad, sometimes people won't even bother reading the CV. Like you just get filtered out right at the top. And I'm strongly suspecting that none of us have time or energy to waste, and none of us are applying to jobs or fellowships or doing anything else that you don't actually want. So it's a core skill that might shape your future in an important way, and we're afraid that doors might slam, right? So there's that. Then there's the aspect of like, we recognize that this is a trained performance, that this is a very specific, in my world, we would call it genre. It's a format where people are not only assessing the content of what you're writing, but also the way that you've structured it and how much you are conforming to what are often unwritten or unspoken rules. We call that the hidden curricula. You may have encountered a whole lot of it, especially if you don't come from a family of professors or you've never been exposed to how things work in academia before. Being able to understand expectations around the format itself is another element of what makes this hard. And you want to conform, but not too much, right? Like this is that balance that we're often trying to strike of how do you telegraph? I know how to write a cover letter. I know how to format a CV. I know how to do all of the things that you expect of me as a person trained in science who is a good fit for whatever this thing is. But I'm also special and a little bit different. You want to stand out, but for the right reasons. So that's true. And we know competition is fierce. I mean, it's easier for me, this bullet point, I'm not as concerned about for all of you because you are among the top candidates. Like you're amazing people. You're competitive. Competition is fierce. But for you, I think it's more a case of like showcasing your credentials and your experiences and the work that you've done rather than trying to paper over weaknesses. And yet, we've already talked about this, self-promotion still feels gross. It can be hard to just imagine saying out loud or writing a sentence that's like, I am fantastic because whatever. And then finally, here's the big piece. We're going to be using this tomorrow, and then also I hope you carry it into your peer mentoring. Feedback can be hard to get right. You may already be carrying some baggage. I know for me, the way that my advisor edited my papers, the way that collaborators and co-authors tore apart scripts that I had worked really hard on, the way that sometimes you see these narratives about you emerging, but like, oh, Liz is not a strong writer. It can be really painful, and it can like add an additional layer of pressure and self-doubt to what is already a plenty difficult thing. So here's my promise to you about anytime you send me anything to read or you ask me for my advice. There's a construct.
Have you taken the bins out? The garbage truck rides at door.
Sorry, that's a garbage truck alert on my phone. That's embarrassing. But so there is an idea called radical candor that you may have encountered before, especially if you sort of are familiar with tech leadership. This is from Kim Scott. And she imagines that we have two axes intersecting in space to create these quadrants. On the y-axis, we have how much we care about the other person, whether they're a trainee, a friend, a colleague, doesn't matter. Do we care about them personally? And then on the x-axis, and this is a tricky bit, is our ability to challenge them directly. So I'm going to sort of work my way around these quadrants and talk about what happens when we are inhabiting these different areas and where we want to target. So if you don't care about someone and you're willing to just confront them directly, that can come across as obnoxious aggression, right? It's painful. Can be brutal. There's plenty of this in science. I hope you are not subject to it today. If, on the other hand, you don't care about someone, but you're not willing to tell them what you actually think of their work, that's a different kind of problem. We call that manipulative insincerity, where it's like, oh, it sounds great. This is wonderful. You can imagine what the problems are there too, right? If you care about someone a lot, and this is a space that I found myself early in my career often inhabiting, where I knew my friends were trying really hard. I knew that their lives were hard, and I knew that the work that they were sharing with me was not fantastic. I was overly empathetic. I was too afraid of hurting their feelings that I wouldn't actually say what they needed to hear. So what we are trying to achieve is radical candor, where I will tell you the truth about where you are. I will give you my opinions couched in a way that I think you can actually hear it. And in particular, I will make a distinction between like a personal preference of like, oh, that's just my aesthetic, versus here's the rationale and the reasoning for why I'm giving you this critique. In this radical candor space, I imagine it as I show you I care because I am willing to spend the time and the social capital that it takes to work together to make your work better. I hope you have advisors or peer mentors or friends or other people in your life that will do this for you. Because when it's done and when it's done well, this is where you grow. You can create profound change when you can see the gap between your aspirations and your current ability to execute, and to close that gap. That's what we're going to try and do. You don't want to be defensive, right? Like it's no good. You don't learn very much. You don't grow if you're in that mode. If you don't believe somebody tells you something is great, you're not going to change. And if you don't know that there's work to be done, if you think it's just great, we failed you too. So this is our framework. This is where we're going to be going. And then my particular offering to you is there are lots and lots of templates. There are lots of examples and lots of guides about the mechanics of writing a cover letter. I gave you 2 examples of these for whether you're going into industry or you're going into academia or you don't know or somewhere in between. What I can do is to really help you think about these aspects of standing out for the right reasons, positioning yourself as competitive and interesting, and getting over the fact that self-promotion still feels gross. And we do that through telling stories. So here's where we really get into the main work. When we write a cover letter, we are doing 2 things, right? The first is explaining why you want this job and why they will want to hire you. I find that figuring out how to answer these questions as honestly I can to myself first, and then to whatever degree I need to, translating that into a structure or a format that works for external audiences helps me achieve clarity. Because if you can't answer that first question, why do you want this job? And not just any job, but like this one, maybe this isn't necessarily the place for you, right? And you then need to switch into the gear of like, okay, I want this job and I have clarity on why, but why do they want me? And you can't just say it, you have to prove it, right? So this is where I want to say to you very, very clearly, you are excellent. Your work is excellent. You do not have to worry about sounding arrogant if you can back it up. If you have the evidence of what you're saying, it's not boasting. It's just stating very clearly and being a friend to whoever's reviewing your cover letter. So I have 2 questions in mind that I'm going to use as the foundation for, we're going to go into some like thinking and writing sprints together. When you ask yourself these questions about a specific job, it's helpful to focus on 2 things. How do you fill out this sentence? I am particularly excited about this thing because. And then number 2, my most significant achievements so far have been. This is where we are going to dig in a lot because you've already listed, I've seen some of you writing that other kinds of advice are like, don't just recap your CV, right? Your cover letter has one job and your CV has a different. The CV or the resume is backward looking. It reports on what you've already done. Your cover letter explains where you want to go, like what your vision for the future is. And this is where stories get to work, because stories by their very nature are a thing that recounts past experiences, but frames them and makes sense of them in who we are now and what we are capable of in the future. So I'm going to pause here and leave this on the screen and ask you, what questions do you have for me? What ideas does this bring up for you? Miho, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just kind of not, or it doesn't pertain to these questions, but it just kind of goes at the foundation. So my name is very foreign sounding, and I don't have a middle name. And so if they're just reading a cover letter or a piece of writing I have written, they will many people actually assume that I am from Japan. So, it's not like my first language, even though I was born and raised in America. And so I was wondering, like, how, even though, that shouldn't be part of or that should be considered when hiring, but a lot of people do have those prejudices of, ease of communication and things like that. And so how do you address that?
Yeah.
Like I've always had this question, and because I've always been told, "Oh, you speak English so well." Like, okay, I was born and raised here, but my name is so foreign sounding that people will assume that I don't come from here. Yeah, so I don't know how to address that in words, only writing.
Yeah, I would actually like to, well, first say, I'm sorry. People are the worst. um, I have not experienced this myself. Like Liz Neeley is a very white sounding name. Um, my husband, his family is Chinese. He was born in Kuala Lumpur. He grew up in the UK and constantly gets people saying things like, oh, where are you really from? Like, oh, your English is so amazing, and those sorts of things. I have really good friends who switch their names in professional contexts specifically because of this. I would love to actually throw it open because many of you may have more first person lived experience in making these decisions than I do, including things like, do you hyphenate your last name? Do you require the use of accents? Or is it fine if people drop them? What do you as a group think? What do you make of this?
I would like, first off, like to say, Mijo, I'm sorry that has happened to you in the past. That's totally unacceptable. I think it depends, like, for example, the suggestion that Liz gives is a good one. However, my name is very tied to my identity. So in my case, I wouldn't me personally, I wouldn't go that route. I do sometimes, I've gotten the comment, oh, your English is so good. How did you do that? And I've gotten my name written wrong, like with an H, or my last name hyphenated when it shouldn't be. And these are things that are just really frustrating in general. So I don't know if right now I have the best solution for it. I just want to tell you that we're here with you and we've experienced similar things. And sometimes the only thing that helps for me is to just talk to my friends and family about it, and know that like it's frustrating, but I just try to move forward.
I guess I can also kind of comment. Thankfully, my name is pretty standard. The only difference is that people forget the accent in mine all the time, but I've also learned to not do that, just because when at a conference once I had the accent and they couldn't find my name. So I was like, oh, it's just probably a lot easier to not type that in because nobody knows what the keyboard shortcuts are. But my PI has a hyphenated name, and I think it's very interesting to see him just basically tell people, no, you have to use it. Like, my name is Carmudi Quintana. I will not go by any other name. You can't just call me Dr. Carmudi. He's always like, no, say my full name. And so I think him setting that like line in the sand of like, I'm not gonna take you shortening my name. When he responds to stuff, he always puts his name, even if they say uh something different. And now he also just says, just call me my first name, which to me is a very strange thing because I've always grown up in the hierarchy of no, they're like a doctor. Call me by my doctor name. And he's like, no, my name's Harry. Just call me Harry. So that also changed my perspective in the him being like, no, in a professional setting, I'm Kermiti Quintana, but like in any other setting, just call me Harry. It's fine. But he does set that standard of, um, I believe somebody like spelled his name wrong, and that was like the first thing he said. He's like, oh, you spelled my name wrong, and just called it out in front of everyone. And I was like, oh, that's kind of awesome. You really don't take it. Um, and I think that's kind of admirable of him.
Tina, go ahead.
So my real name is Clarence Teen, and it seems very simple to me, but it really traumatizes people. They want to put all sorts of different syllables in it, and I teach, and yeah, I'm Dr. Clarence, I'm Dr. Tina, I'm Dr. Whoever, and when I was young, it used to be a real thing for me, but it does just really amuse me now, and I like because I cringe every time I hear my real name, but people practice it, and it's been a nice way for me to kind of build community with people around something I used to find really awful when I was a kid. So I've just been trying to reclaim it the best I can.
And was there any moment where you could feel that starting to shift for you, or is it just one of those like life things that happens very gradually over time?
No, I start working for the government, and they do not care what your nickname is. The name on your birth certificate is what they give you, and it will literally take like a few years to get them to correct it in the system. So I just had to deal with it, and people would actively avoid me because they didn't want to try and pronounce my name, and I had to get comfortable and sort of give the tutorial, and then yeah, and I had to feel like I owed it to myself to ask them to honor this part of my name and my identity. It's part of it's a family name. And once I sort of got to the point where I had ownership, then I'm like, I can redefine it however I want to. I can be okay with it when someone's uncomfortable with it or they want to sort of approach it in a way that feels comfortable for them. But I've been Tina. I was Tina for at least until I was in my 40s. So it's just been really recently and not by choice, but it's been a good thing.
I think so. My last name has like a lot of vowels, which really throws people off. And I get it, like it's phonetically very difficult. And I think early on it used to get misspelled like all the time. And not just like on like casual documents, but like I got an award and they sent out the announcement to the department for the College of Medicine and my name is misspelled. And I think early on I was like, oh, I should like be grateful just that I'm like being acknowledged and getting this award. And I think in the last few years I've been like, no, I do think it matters that my name is spelled correctly. And even like recently I got a diversity fellowship and they posted the announcement on like Twitter and LinkedIn. They misspelled my name. And that was like a little bit awkward, right? Because it's like a situation where I was like, come on, like you guys are used to a lot of vowels. But it's like, I think before I wouldn't have said anything. And this time I actually just like politely was like, hey, like if you could please update the name, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I realized like, it's like not that big a deal really to just want to have people to say your name correctly and pronounce it correctly. And that if I'm willing to gently correct people, then it won't be as bad when someone else comes behind me and wants their name corrected. Like it's just like normalizing like spelling is hard and English doesn't help teach you spelling in other languages really well because like there's like the U and the E and the I and whatever. And so it's like, it's nobody's fault that they're misspelling it. Like it doesn't make sense in their native tongue. But just being open to like making those corrections and not turning it into a big deal and just respecting people's needs and desires. I did shake like a wet Yorkie while sending that email, but it got sent and that's what matters.
That's making me think of sort of like the tactical ways that we can handle corrections. And I'm curious if after you sent that email, like it makes subsequent emails easier to send. You may even have like a way that you've figured, like you said, I can correct them gently, which is wonderful if that's your style.
So I don't think I think my problem is that like in personal settings, I'm okay, completely fine with being like, hey, this thing happened. Can we please not do it again? Whatever, blah, blah, blah. And that's fine, right? Because it's like healthy communication and that's how you have strong relationships. And then in professional settings, I'm like kind of a doormat. And I'm like, this is wild to have such like polar opposite behaviors. But I think it does come from like that feeling of like, I'm just lucky to be here. And so you don't want to like upset anyone. And then sometimes you realize it's like, no, you've done the work, you've done the thing. Like you can ask for these accommodations. Or I just have my younger sister read the email and she's she hits send on anything. So she's like, it's great, just like full send. She'll like throw in extra punctuation. I'm like, okay, perfect. So that's been my workaround is passing off the send button to someone else.
I'm loving what I'm also seeing in the chat going on here. And I think we could talk about this for a lot longer. I'm willing to hold space for it too. What I think if you're willing, does anybody else have anything you wanted to say that you haven't had a chance to contribute yet on this topic? I will say that a final tactic that some of my friends have used to good effect, like I have a friend who's an Inuk scholar and her name is Kenya Itchakyuk. She uses the little like how to pronounce my name thing on LinkedIn and then also on her website. And she has a phonetic spelling that she uses on her resume CV in order to circumvent that. So at least the people who have good intentions and do care about getting it right, and dear Lord, the bar is so low, and I am sorry for that, but that makes it maybe that much easier for those people at least. I want to turn our attention in our final 20 minutes to the task in front of us about actually writing this cover letter. I would like you to spend the next 15 or so getting yourselves ready to do the work tomorrow. So back in the Google shared workspace, number 4 on day 1 is taking stock and setting goals. So I'm going to give you, say, 12 minutes roughly. I'd like you to spend the first half of that pulling together everything you've already done. So where are the cover letters that you've written recently? And recently may mean different things to different people here, depending on what you've been up to lately. If it's 2 years old, but you're basically starting from the same place, that's fine. Grab templates you've loaded or examples. Grab the CV or resume that's your most recent version. Do not be ashamed or feel strange if there's stuff that's out of date or really needs work. So I'd like you to use the first half of this 12 or so minute chunk to gather materials together so you can look at what you've already produced. And then the second half of that, take stock and write notes. You can attach your name if you want for accountability. In my example, I did mine, or you can leave it anonymous. But what I'd like you to do is articulate, what do you think you need to do? What do you think you need to do next? Sort of like take stock of where are you right now in what you've already written and your starting place for doing cover letters. I will mostly be quiet. If you have questions, drop them in the Google document in the questions and suggestions section or in the chat. And I will start talking again when we are through these 12 minutes. All right, we have about 5 minutes left. If you've completed this exercise, then you can scroll down and you'll see I've listed an invitation to you. To prepare for your next steps, I want you to actually do some writing. I can see a lot of goals here. So if you want to, your invitation is create your own Google document that you own. And if you want, share it with me by dropping a link in this Google document as a place where I can give you feedback one-on-one if you'd like. Adriana, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking obviously about cover letters and kind of the 2 questions you have up, and it just makes me think a lot about how every time I've written a cover letter, it's mostly due to formality. And I've never really think about it as super intentional, because I mostly have done it for grants. And they're usually pretty short. They just have the title, the NIH part that you want it to go to kind of thing. So I was just thinking about how in detail, or how long should they be if I'm thinking more of a postdoc or any job. I'm guessing obviously it's going to change a little bit for that aspect, because also when I applied to jobs before I got into grad school, I also did those, but I still felt like it was mostly formality. There wasn't really anything. I guess I personally didn't have much to put in it because I was straight out of college. So I'm thinking now, what kind of things would I put in it that my CV wouldn't have? Because I know you mentioned it as your future, and I'm thinking about it as here's what I have to offer, rather than what am I getting out of. So yeah.
Yeah, so this is one of those questions. So much in communications, the answer is, well, it depends, right? It depends on the context. In different places, like one academic job is not the same as another academic job, and those are very different than like industry jobs. I will say that what you have just described is very common. I've felt it myself, and I think a lot of people essentially just write a cover letter to basically be like, hi, I'm applying for this job. Here's like a summary, like a quick readable summary of my qualifications. Like, please see the attached. The problem is going back to that idea of like competitiveness. And if you imagine putting yourself, like, how many of you have ever hired somebody or had to go through applications yourself? Have you ever been in that position? I'm seeing Ingrid saying yes.
I have a grad school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you are applying for something that is competitive and there are like dozens or hundreds of other people also applying, many CVs look more or less the same, especially early on in your career. And so the cover letter is a place where you can really get a sense of distinction. Like, oh, this is somebody, for example, if it's something as small as they've got really good writing skills. Writing skills are a soft skill, a transferable skill, and a thing that most employers in any variety of positions want. And so they are looking like it's a quick way to make somebody already look at your package and be like, oh yeah, like I'm interested in this one. It's not a guarantee. And I do think like we have to be reasonable about like the return on investment and how much to worry about this, and like what is the difference between a cover letter that's like 90% good versus 98% good, and is that worth like 6 days extra work? Probably not. So many of these decisions you are going to be making as you progress through your career are judgment calls. And so you will need to be integrating feedback from people who are more senior. You may be doing informational interviews. You may ask friends for their opinions, but ultimately that decision comes back to you. I think if we all believe, which feels like a foundational belief in this program for the years I've been part of it, that our whole selves matter so much, and that we understand science as a human process done by unique individuals, that bringing some dimension of that to your cover letter is is not only like a strategic, pragmatic thing to do, which is my first line of argument, but also is a statement of value. It is that it is worth us being able to share these parts of ourselves and making it part of expectations in a hiring conversation, both on your side as you're coming in as an applicant, as well as what you are looking for when you are the one on the other side of that table. Yeah. We have just about 5 minutes left before we need to wrap for tonight. I can see so many emerging themes and like ideas that I'm excited about and I want to pick up on. In particular, I think I probably was just mirroring what I've already been synthesizing from this about your desire to talk about your priorities, your volunteer works, your figuring out how to find that right line between disclosure and being personal and personable, but not being overly intimate or exposing yourself in ways that you don't want to, right? To people who haven't earned that kind of trust. What I would like before we come to a close is to ask, do you have any specific asks of me? Because I still have time between tonight and tomorrow when we pick up again. I always do this. It's part of my practice as a facilitator and a trainer, is to think about what does this group of people need and to shape plans accordingly. Is there anything that you haven't heard yet? And I'm going to stop screen sharing. Knowing that tomorrow we are going to do some writing together and that we're going to get into the specifics of making these choices and these judgment calls in the context of a cover letter. Is there anything else you would like to ask me for or remind me that you need?
Yeah, I asked a question in the chat. That was really it. I'm still really curious.
Okay. Let me find. In the Zoom chat or in the Google Doc?
In the Zoom one. It's just about your trash notification. Did it say
Okay,
like
I was
it,
trying to avoid that. Yes, so I use my reminders on my phone to speak to me for important things like the trash can coming. And since it has to say something out loud, I decided to make it funny. And so it changes every month. Like last month it was saying the trash can waits for no man, and now it says the garbage truck rides at dawn. So I can see my face getting really red in the camera. But yes, it does indeed say the garbage truck rides at dawn. And it does, it's true. It
oh,
comes at like
yeah, I mean that's really cool. That is awesome. I will do that with mine.
Christina, I hope you have a different question for me.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. That was really funny. My question might not be super relevant to like the actual writing aspect of science communication. Mine is more about the oral communication. If maybe you can put in your 2 cents with your experience. One thing that I've noticed when I give like my science talks or even if it's not research, but like science outreach talks, is that I always go way too fast. And no matter how many people tell me, and like no matter what I try, I can't seem to find a concrete way to get over that. So if you have any tips for that, either between today or tomorrow, that would be really great.
Yeah. Can I ask one more question instead of using our time to answer it? Do you have any sense of why you speed up?
I really don't, because it might be nerves, but when I practice it on my own time, it's still not at the time. For example, my research talk for my postdoc interviews should be 45 minutes, but right now it's 35. Even when I do it in my house on my own pace, it's 40. So there's some wiggle room in there, but my my committee members and my friends have told me you should definitely slow down, but I can't find a concrete way to do that.
Do you notice your heart rate speeding up?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, okay. I will think about some of the tactics that I use and that I have been trained to use in terms of stage performance that helped me. I think the hardest part about this is like no single piece of advice I give is going to work for all of us in the same ways. And so when you're trying to fix an issue you've identified for yourself, you might just keep going through. And I hear you. I feel bad already because you said everything everyone's told me hasn't worked so far. And I'm worried that I'm just going to add a couple more suggestions that don't work. But I will do my best.
No, I really appreciate anything at all. Thank you.
Yeah. When
Liz,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, there was in the chat a question about how to protect ourselves from DEI higher mindsets. And Kim, I'm not sure, do you
I
want
can,
to?
yeah, I can
Yeah.
expand on that. I was, sorry. I think in my head it was like more so about how others who have this like mentality that we're seeing, I guess, become more normalized, that like people of color are getting preference, like the backlash against affirmative action becoming sort of like more public, and how to like balance wanting to share our identities in things like cover letters, while also like what you said about backing up like what we're saying because we have the experience and expertise to like highlight that without it. I guess I don't know, I guess I'm feeling like really defensive now because mentors have been like, tone down the DEI like outreach stuff, the identity politics, because it's not a good time right now. I guess that's kind of like where my mind is at right now.
I love that it's like, ooh, stop it with your identity politics so that other people's identity politics can go completely unchallenged. It's what it feels like. My interpretation of the landscape, which is incredibly frustrating. I will make time for us to have these conversations tomorrow. I will think about some concrete ideas that I have and put them into the Google Doc. But I also want to make sure that we end on time because I know for some of you it is late into the evening. So I hope that today was valuable to you. I appreciate seeing some of your faces, hearing from some of you, reading everything you've been contributing into the Google Doc. I appreciate being trolled for my ridiculous garbage truck reminder, and I look forward to tomorrow. So until then, take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you soon.
Night, y'all.
Good night.
Thank you so much,
Night.
Liz.
Thank you. Good night.
Great. Oh, there were